Can you just walk me through? I'm just curious, like, how did you end up in product? Is that something that you want to do? I know you had a comp sci degree. Maybe you were interested in other aspects, other types of jobs in tech. Like, walk me through that.
Yeah, so in the meantime, I went to business school. So I did
Mm,
my master in computer science, and then I worked for a few years, and now I went to business school. So I was in Chicago. And after graduating, I worked in strategy consulting for a little bit. And when I decided to go back to the startup world, it was really interesting to me that I had like all of these other things beside engineering that I knew about now. And that like so what was really cool is that I had the understanding of the engineering side. So I could interface pretty easily with engineers and know what they were talking about and kind of like think about the rest of the business I think most of the time what you're seeing in startup is that if there is a massive disconnect between what engineering is doing and what the rest of the business is trying to drive, then that runs into a bunch of problems. And I think
mm,
with me being an engineer and me having that kind of like business knowledge and at least developing some business knowledge in parallel, I was kind of a good bridge between
mm.
those two worlds. And so I sat in between kind of the CEO at the time and the engineering team, and I was able to kind of like say, okay, I understand what you're trying to do. Now let's translate it in a roadmap and in things that engineering can execute against. And so yeah, it was kind of like natural for me to sit there.
That's cool. I think product is one of the coolest tech career track that you can have in tech. And a lot of product folks today either have a very robust business background, others have a technical background, and others have a hybrid, kind of like you, where you're able to just leverage a lot of your experience in B school, consulting, and a comp sci degree, and really kind of create that perfect storm where you're able to really be hands-on and create exciting products at really great companies. So I think that totally makes sense. And then can you just walk me through like what is, for people who are unfamiliar with product just in general, like what was your day-to-day like as a product manager? Obviously, just broad strokes generalization, but in case people are
I
curious.
think, yeah, I think we need to be careful about the terminology as well because product really means something different for every organization. And I strongly believe that every organization doesn't need the same type of product manager and product function in general, right? So I would say there are a lot of things that needs to happen to go from ideation to execution of something, right? Of a
Mhm.
product in general, right? So like you get kind of like the upstream, you have the business thinking and like the strategic thinking, let's say, like
Mhm.
where do we want to take the company? What do we want to do, right? That usually translates into some kind of framework. OKR is like a pretty like typical framework used out there, right? So like let's say from the strategy element emerged your objectives, right? And so like you're saying, hey, like the business really need to focus on growth and maybe on cost cutting, let's say, right?
Mhm.
Like, and so these two big areas will like kind of like be broken down into the more specific aspects, right? So like let's say we want to focus on growth, like we're going to start a track that is focusing on organic growth increase, right? And we're going to start a crisis, like that, a track that is more focused on like building viral loops inside the product and things like that, right? And then
Mhm.
there is a whole part of ideation happening there, right? And then from ideation we'll kind of like be extracted different projects that will eventually constitute a roadmap, be prioritized next to each other according to different criteria, and then like pushing this project to the loop of like design and engineering and actually executing and running on this project, and then like closing the loop by continuing to
Mhm.
iterate on these projects, right? So I think this is obviously a lot of range, right? And so like depending on the organization, like product can start from the strategizing to the road mapping to being more from the road mapping to the execution side, right? And I tend to call the downstream product manager project managers because it's
Mhm.
much more about like defining how to do things and what to do. But I think there is a place for everything, and in the end it's
Mhm.
about what is right for the organization to be successful, so for example, some organizations have like business units who are doing most of the strategic thinking and market research and all of that, right? Some others really push that on the product side to do this research and to interview users and all of that. So like it really depends on the capability of your company, how you want to structure it, what you believe is the best function for executing. Like it also maps to your business processes, right? So for example, I was a head of product for Handy. Handy was a very operational heavy type of organization, right? We were sending cleaners to homes. And so when most of the operations of your organization are like this, they're a little bit like untied to your technical product, right?
Mhm.
And so we had a whole like business unit really focused on just following up operationally on things and KPIs that needed improvement, right? In other organizations, like Square, where product was really integrated with the business thinking, right? Like product was like working with a business unit that was much more integrated to do market research and kind of like making sure that the product was in line with the market needs, right? So like really every organization is different, and as it should be. You should craft your organization to be the most efficient without forcing a product function where it doesn't need to be, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that. And it's 100% true. Product can mean completely different from one company to another. And then how you define product can also mean completely something different from one team, one company to another. So I appreciate that. I'm just curious, when you were going through your career, what part of that process from upstream, downstream were you most excited about? Like, what did you like the strategy kind of upstream? Did you like more execution tactical downstream? Did you like kind of touching a bit of everything as you kind of progress through your career?
Yeah, personally, I really liked everything. I obviously like the strategy side and defining what to do, right? I really enjoy the ideation phase that goes from like, hey, here's what we need to achieve, and here are ideas of projects that are just, pure ideas on the board. And I also honestly really like to push things out of the door and get the gratification of seeing features and products in the wild. And I like being aggressive about it. I like short timeline that just like ship a lot of product, and because I think as you see your product morphing is just very satisfying, and it just creates new opportunities for you in the market that loops back into the strategy piece. So I think it's a beautiful cycle, and I was always very interested in all parts of the system.
What inspired you to create Fight to begin with? I know that it was obviously a personal kind of problem or personal thing that you want to address, but what inspired you?
Yeah. So, I mean, my inspiration is my dog, of course. I got Thor about 6 years ago now, and I was already kind of like thinking about starting my next things again in the spirit of like learning new things. I felt like I learned so much during my first experience building a startup and then selling it and then working at bigger companies and then investing a little bit in the meantime. I learned so much about the ecosystem that I felt like as a second time founder, I would be so much better at it. I really wanted to start something again. So I was kind of like playing with some ideas, and then I get my dog, and then I just identified so many things missing in the dog pet space in general, in the dog space more particularly. And there was really no tech company in that space. And I really like the greenfield kind of space like this, where by just building really interesting bleeding edge tech, you can create a lot of value. And what happens that one day, so I hired this dog walker to walk him because I was in my day job, and the dog walker started lying to me about how far he would walk him and all of that. And I had the camera at home, so I was able to see when he was coming back and that. And I was like, it's really upsetting because you give your dog that you love to like someone trusting them, and it's really upsetting to not be able to like trust someone with something so valuable. And so I was like, that would be kind of cool if I just put like a GPS on the dog and track the dog. And there are a bunch of products already existing in the market, so I bought kind of all of them, and none of them were really doing a good job. And I think coming from my previous experience at Square, I could spot like what was the problem with that space. I think there were like a bunch of technology challenges that like most of these companies were not resolving the right way, in my opinion. And I had a few ideas on how to improve that. So I kind of like built a small prototype with like components that were available, strapped it on my dog, sent him out with the dog walker. And just, I gotta tell you, that feeling of being able to just take the phone, see the map, and see that location update in real time, and actually having like a clear picture of where the dog was for the past 2 or 3 hours and number of steps. And it was just very magic. And I was like, okay, this is just, if we build something that delivers that to every dog owner out there, it seems absolutely going to create something.
I love it. It's such a great founder mentality. It's like, I'm dealing with a personal problem, and instead of relying on someone else, you know what? I'm just going to create something myself. And your whole company, it's basically predicated on this very personal problem that you're fulfilling. And your first, I guess, milestone was seeing your dog Thor walking with this walker, but then now you know exactly where they're going, so that person cannot lie to you.
I call that the founder's blissful naivety. You need to think that exact sentence at some point you're gonna die. It cannot be that hard to do X. It's actually extremely hard, but you need to have that naivety to think that it's not that hard, so that you can just start working on it. And then once you're working on it, you have to be stubborn enough to not let it go.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So how do you go from now creating that to be like, you know what, I should maybe just bet on myself fully again and start a company around this? Because surely someone like yourself probably probably had other plan B or plan C ideas you were ideating at that time and maybe even
Yeah.
tinkering away with. And for like most of your background working at these big companies, a lot of them were just software companies, right? So to go from a lot of software-based companies to now be like, you know what, maybe I should build a product in the space, dogs. I don't really have that much experience in other than my own pet. But also then, to think of like, oh, it should actually be not just a pure software product, but also have a hardware element to it. At what point, you said earlier really well, at some point you just have to have faith and just have action and just go. But like,
Yeah.
when did that happen?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question because one of the things that I struggled with was, especially when it comes to early stage startup ideas, you will always find a reason not to start that company, right? And the reality is that there are a ton of reasons, right? By definition, the odds are against you a little bit. So it's like, if you want to objectively look at every single idea out there, whether it's Airbnb, Uber, or any other massively successful company, you can take that pre-launch and destroy this idea pretty easily with some pretty hard assumptions, right? And so there has to be some kind of leap of faith at some point. I think what was helpful for me is, on one side, in between Square and Handy, I did a little bit of investment with a group, and I learned a lot from these guys. And we had some kind of a matrix to evaluate the ideas. And it was like, is the market big enough? Is there a drastic competition in the space? Like, and there was a lot, like kind of a laundry list of things that every idea we had or every pitch we would receive, we kind of run that through these kind of objective criteria to evaluate them and kind of like to at least clear them, right? And that's one that helped me filter out a lot of ideas, right? You'd be surprised the number of great ideas you have, and there's probably nothing happening out there. And then you look around and there is a company who raised 150 million who has like a $2 billion valuation doing exactly what you're describing, So it's like, this kind of things is like really important. I think having like a clear framework on how to evaluate ideas and develop it progressively so that, you run out of these reasons, right? Of objective reasons, right? The second thing I was doing is that I had a few friends of mine who are in the VC space, and they evaluate ideas all day long, right? So I would pitch them my ideas, not pitch them to raise money, but actually just to like tell them, hey, what do you think about that, right? Here's something I'm playing with, right? And sometimes they would tell you, oh, I've got like 5 or 6 other startups who pitch me the same thing the past year, right? Or like, and all of a sudden it brings you back to earth a little bit, and you're like, okay, well, there's maybe a reason why, this team didn't execute properly on that, or maybe that idea always ends up in this other place, right? And there's a pivot happening, right? But I think the other thing that is a little bit more subtle is that like you start developing hey, are they actually excited about this or not, right? Like, so you start getting a barometer of where it was going, right? And I remember distinctly, I pitched to one of my friends that I respect a lot the idea for the GPS tracking guy, and I brought my prototype to the meeting, and his reaction was completely different than any other ideas that I brought to him. He was like, oh my God, this is really good. I think there is something really great. Can I introduce you to my friend who's investing in that space here? I would love to write the first check. Like, the whole thing completely changed dynamic, right? And I think it's important, like, to realize that whether it's in your network, people are going to be, this is a great idea. This is very great, right? And like, there is a massive difference between that and like, hey, can I give you $1 million to start this tomorrow? Because, yeah, I think, so I think this kind of happened. And then at some point, I remember I kind of ran out of a reason not to do it. I was like, okay, I can always find a reason not to do it. That's pretty easy. But then I can't really find any reason not to do it. I was excited about the space, excited about the product. I knew the upside opportunity was worth my time and effort. And yeah, I didn't know all the craziness that was coming later down, but I think at that stage, that's what really helped me make the decision.
And what is the future for Fi moving forward, Jonathan? What really excites you as you look into not just the end of this year, but next year, next couple of years? Obviously, there's only so much that you can share, but is there anything that you really look forward to, or something that really kind of gets you out of bed every day?
Yeah, sure. I mean, listen, there's a lot of new product developments happening here. There's a lot of software features that we're shipping pretty soon. The company keeps evolving. We just hired a VP of data and data science because at this point we're processing something like 1.5 terabytes a day of data streaming from these colors in the field. So there are obviously a lot of this information we can use to build new, more interesting, more refined features for dog owners and for the dog community to be able to understand these animals. Because I think one of the things that really drives each and every one of us here is that, like, dogs are very, very special relationship to humans, right? It's one of the only interspecies relationship that has really, developed for the past 500 years, right? And there is so little we know about them, right? Like the way we develop medication, the way we develop or understanding communication, the way we interact with this dog is still very primal, you know. And so what the reason why we built the 5 color is obviously, yes, track dogs, make sure they don't escape, save them, etc. Right? But I think the key to us building the color was really to be on the dog 24/7 and start collecting all of that data about the behavior of the dog, right? And start leverage technology to actually become some kind of interface between the human and the dog. Because if I can start qualifying the movement of the dog, the sound of the dog, the acceleration of the dog, the overall behavior of the dog into something that is digestible to a human, and be, hey, your dog is stressed, your dog is like needs to go out, it's not, didn't work enough today, this kind of things, didn't sleep well last night, you know, we do sleep tracking now, then we really elevate that relationship between the human and the dog, right? And that becomes something really magic. So that's my goal for the next few years, is bring that to the masses. We're scratching the surface of the 100 million dogs in the US, and so my goal is to put that as fast as possible on more than 1 million dogs.
I love that. And just to end this podcast, I'd love to ask you 2 more questions. So the first is, for someone that has worked at phenomenal companies in tech in a product role, for someone who wants to aspire to have a successful career in product, or maybe someone that can learn a thing or two about maybe finding, applying, or succeeding at really great companies as a job, what would it be for you? If you can give one advice.
Just do it. I think don't wait for people to tell you the right time. Just jump into it and start doing it, you know?
And the second question, and your response could still be very much the same, is for someone who wants to just be a founder, right? And start and build a really successful company. What is one advice that you would like to give to the listeners?
Like, start building, you know, identify what's in it out there, build something people want, and yeah, just really start doing it, because until you do it, it's not happening, you know?
For sure. Action, action, action.
100%.
Jonathan, thank you so much for spending a couple of minutes this evening and chatting. I mean, I found this conversation very insightful and very valuable. And of course, we could talk for much, much longer on everything. But I again want to thank you for taking your time. And I really appreciate the fact that you were able to just wonderfully outline your professional career, from graduating business school to working consulting to working in product to a lot of different companies, now building Phi to the company that it is right now. And I am super excited personally to see where you and the team will be in the next 3 to 5 years.